All right, you guys, we are here with one of my favorite people. I remember the first time I ever met Danny in person, and she like walked in the room in Austin, Texas, and I was like, oh, I love her. I love your vibe. I love all the things. So, welcome to Chasing Alignment.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited that we get to do this. I haven't seen you in so long. I'm excited to have met Alexa because we have some really cool, like crossover stories, and I'm just happy to
Yes.
be here. I'm really proud of you. I love podcasts, and I really love when people like collaborate. So I love that you guys are doing this together.
Yes. Thank you so much. We're so excited. So, we would love to hear your backstory on who you are and how you've got to where you are today. I know it's just like your story is amazing. And so let's dive in. Let's do
So rip it. Yeah. So
it.
there's so many places I could start, but where I would probably start is, ironically enough, I went to UNLV, which we just found out that Alexa did too. So
Yes.
I was the first in my family to get my college degree, graduate from college. And then I did what any college graduate would do. I ran off and joined the circus. My parents were so proud. And I became an acrobat at SeaWorld. So first job out of college, acrobat at SeaWorld. I was living the dream. It was just like I'm getting paid to fly and play, basically. And then one morning, a couple months in, I got out of bed, fell out of bed, basically. And long story short, I ended up in the hospital, and the doctor came in and said, Danny, you're not going to be able to perform again. And we're not sure you're going to be able to walk again. You're lucky to be alive. And I found out that I got a bacterial infection from the water at SeaWorld because I was actually in Mission Bay. It wasn't the like tanks that are cleaned. So our show was on a stadium facing the bay, and that bay is really contaminated from like sewage from Tijuana. And so I got a bacterial infection that nearly killed me. And it luckily, I put in quotes, only paralyzed me. And so I cut off the nerves from my sacroiliac joint, couldn't move my legs. And as you can probably imagine, maybe if people here who are an athlete or doing anything physical, I left thinking if I can't walk and if I'm can't do this. My degree was in physical education too. So everything about me was my physicality, my identity was in that. Then I don't even want to be alive. Like, what's the point? And so I was hospitalized for a month, had to go back home and live with my parents, which was also a big deal because I moved out at 18. I was super independent. And that was something I promised myself I would never do, was live with my parents. And so I was honestly just depressed, living and like taking pain pills, just getting through the day sleeping, until one of my best friends, she had been diagnosed with cancer. And I knew it was terminal. She was only 18. Her name was Kelly. And Kelly came to visit me at my house after I got out of the hospital. And at this point, I was able to use a walker. And I opened the door, and she just stood there and looked at me, and she was like, Danny, I can't believe this happened to you. This is so unfair. And she had just had like a hysterectomy and half of her liver removed. And I knew she was going to die. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm such an asshole. Like, she's saying this is unfair and I'm going to live, right? She has a death sentence. And so, literally, that was a turning point for me to go, holy crap, like I'm getting a second chance at life, and I may not be able to walk, but I get to live and she doesn't. And so, that was a really, really tough pill for me to swallow. But it really shifted to where I was like, I got to get out of this pity party. I stopped taking my pain meds. I started to ask my mom to drive me to the gym, and I would sit on the recumbent bike and just like push my legs around with my hands. And I had these like affirmation cards that I wrote, put them on the front, and I would just read them. And they said, like, I'm walking easily and effortlessly. And like, lots of different affirmations and things I wasn't doing. Like, I was not walking easily and effortlessly. But I did that, and I didn't have insurance, so I couldn't do physical therapy. So I was literally going online and trying to figure that out myself. And so that really led me into personal training, because I figured if I'm learning this stuff, I'm going to get a certification. I just thought if I had a degree, like I just wanted to get all the certificates. So I got certified in personal training. Didn't even know if I'd ever be able to walk or use it. I just wanted to, I don't know, have proof that I got the education. And I ended up coaching gymnastics. And then just by crazy events that I couldn't coach anymore, I ended up becoming a personal trainer. And that launched me into my career, really. And this is how I got to where I am today. So I started training clients. I started to build a brand on MySpace and then Facebook. And I built this really big community called the Sweaty Betties. And I had over 300,000 fans on Facebook. And I was doing membership sites and just really making fitness fun. And my philosophy at the time was no excuses, which I laugh at now because I think that it's a little hardcore. But when I was going through learning to walk again, I started to notice a lot of people at the gym who were disabled, people I would never notice before, but people coming in on canes and walkers. And I was like, wow, there's so many people that are not making excuses. They're coming in here. And so that was my big philosophy. And like, you can do anything. But unfortunately, that extreme mindset led me to complete adrenal fatigue because I was doing fitness competitions and just my body shut down. And soon I gained 30 pounds in like 2 months, even though I was doing all the quote right things. I was eating super clean. I was doing probably 2 hours of cardio a day, doing too much. And so my mindset started to shift. And I also noticed my clients were, a lot of them would say things to me like, Danny, just tell me what to eat and I'll do it. Just tell me what to do. Like they just wanted to know exactly what to do.
Mhm.
But when I really looked at that, I'm like, you are doing the right things. So something else is going on. And when I dug into it deeper, it's like there was some binge eating on the weekends. There was some secret eating. There was some other self-sabotaging behavior going on. And I realized wasn't what they were eating. It was what was eating them. And
Mhm.
that was a big shift for me to go, you don't need a meal plan. Like, you don't need a workout. You need to like talk to your partner. You need to deal with the shit with your mom. Like, you need to deal with your trauma and go to counseling. And I could recognize it because I was the same way. Like, I had shit I needed to deal with. And so I just got to a place where I was like, I can't do this. I can't do the fitness thing anymore. If one more person asks me if they can eat carbs after 4 o'clock, I'm going to lose my shit. And that led me into just starting to talk about things that I thought that mattered. So that was finances, that was relationships, that was dealing with trauma, mental health. And during this time, the economy crashed. My ex-husband and I lost our home. And so we were going through our own little financial crisis. And I found this money mentor, and she really shifted my mindset. And I went from being in debt, just filing bankruptcy, to and making $19,000 one year, to the next year making $166,000, being debt free in 69 days. And so I started to share that, and that kind of caught on. So soon I was just talking about money and money mindset. And ultimately that kind of led into a lot of different things. So at the same time, I was helping coaching trainers on how to build their online business. I was talking to consumers about money mindset, and I was speaking to female entrepreneurs about how to share their story and build brands and businesses online. So it's kind of doing a lot. And ultimately to today, and where like this last shift has happened, was 2020. I've been living out of a suitcase for the last 3 years, traveling and speaking. And 2020 happened, and all of my gigs got canceled in the spring. So first I'm like, that's fine. My fall is good. And then everything got canceled in the fall. And my whole year was a blank slate. And what it allowed me to do, and I really am grateful for it, was to give me space to think and to give me space to really look at like my brand and my mission and what I'm teaching. And I really had this moment where I broke down crying to my boyfriend, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm an expert anymore. I'm not a fitness expert. I don't want to be a money expert. Like, I didn't want to be with the Dave Ramseys. I didn't want to keep going in that direction.
Mhm.
And I'm like, the only thing I'm an expert at is starting over. I'm like do over Danny. I'm crying as I said this. And then I said that and I literally laughed at myself. And I'm like, fuck yeah, I am do over Danny. And then I started to really think more deeply about it. And I'm going, everybody has to start over, every single one, for some reason or another, whether it's moving to another state like I've done, whether it's divorce like I went through, whether it's my business having to revamp itself, whether it's death of a family loved one, whether it's a miscarriage, whether it's like so many things. There's so many things we have to start over.
Mhm.
And for me, I think starting over feels like you're being punished. You're like, oh, you're playing a game. You like got to go back to square one. Where if you ever play games with kids and like, let's say they roll the dice and they get on one of the bad spots, they're like, no, let me get a do-over. Let me get a do-over. Like they want to roll it again and try again. And so while starting over feels like a punishment, I think if we shift our mindset to getting a do-over, then it's something we get to do. And I talk a lot about rewriting your story, and it's kind of ties in with that, is that we get to try again and do something different this time and maybe make a different outcome. Like those choose your own adventure books, we can go, all right, like plot twist, we're going to try this thing, and we get a new choice to go somewhere else. So long way about the story, but that's where I am right now.
Oh my gosh, you are just literally a beautiful being. Seriously. I mean, I'm speechless to an extent just because I love how you were able to just at the end of it, ups, downs, ups, downs, ups, downs, but to really see that like doing things over, starting over, rewriting that story isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes society trains us to think like, oh shit, that means we fucking failed. Starting
Yeah.
over means we failed. We made some mistakes. We should have some regrets. And it's like, hell no.
No, it's so true. Every time, and one of the pieces of the story that I skipped over was my husband had an affair, and that was a huge trauma for me. At the time, I was like, my career was really taking off. I was getting asked to speak everywhere. I was working on a book proposal. Things were going so incredibly well. And then suddenly my personal life was like the rug pulled out. And that shook me to my core. It took my confidence away. It was like, if the one person you think that's supposed to love you is lying to you, it was just this huge betrayal. And also, I think I had all these ideas of what affairs look like. I always thought, oh, she must have been a nag, or maybe they weren't having sex, or they were having problems at home. And none of those things were happening. Like we were still having sex. I thought he was my best friend. It was so, so shocking. And so it took me out, and it really made me, and I had to reevaluate even what I was preaching online. I was going, man, I talked to people about this, and this. And I'm like, is that even true? I had to question my own beliefs and what I was talking about. And then I had to move to a new state. I slept on my best friend's couch for a month, got my own apartment, and had to start over there. And like you said, Alexa, I felt like a failure. I felt like I failed in my marriage. I was like, I suck as a wife. I don't know what I'm doing, obviously, in business, because I'm talking about things. And how could this happen to me? If I'm like the personal development person and I know all this stuff, how could this happen to someone like me? So I completely felt like I failed in everything. And the reality is like things will happen in our life, and a lot of them are out of our control. You might lose a job. Someone might do something to you like this. You could lose a family member, have a diagnosis of cancer or brain tumor, or there's so many things that we don't have control. And that doesn't mean we're a failure, because we can't control everything. We literally cannot. And the reframe is so important, because if you sit there thinking you're a failure, there's not much you can do with that. Like you just get to have a pity party and you get to feel sorry for yourself. And that feels good for a while. But at some point, it's like, okay, now what? Like, what are you going to do with that? When I was sitting there feeling sorry for myself, being paralyzed, and then my friend comes in who's like, she's got cancer. I'm like, oh, yeah, like I'm not going to cry about this anymore. There's always somebody who has it worse. And it's not to say your feelings aren't valid and that we don't get to have that time. I think it's important to grieve and to let yourself feel the pain. But if you stay in that feeling like a failure, then ultimately you're letting something else win, when I think we need to win, and we can win, but it does take an effort, and it does take choice, and you have to make a decision. And the decisions are never easy. Like sometimes the decision is a decision between something really shitty and something really crappy. And it's like, do you want a crap sandwich, or do you want a scab sandwich, or something equally disgusting? So I'm sitting here going, okay, I can either stay with my husband, and that's going to be really hard to build up trust again, and we're going to have to work through some really hard shit, or I can leave, and that means I got to start over, maybe have to date again, move to another place, and that's really hard. And so I have two really hard decisions, and none of them sound fun. All I really want is that this didn't ever happen, but the thing does happen. And so we have to choose between two hard things. And so there's no right answer. I really wanted to make it work, to be honest. And that wasn't up to me. There were still two people that had to make that decision. So we did end up filing for divorce. But I don't think that, when we get in these situations that hard things happen, you know, looking at it more objectively, not making it about you, not making it about your failings and your failure, just going, this happened, we can't change it. So what decisions can I make to get my power back is kind of how you have to look at it.
I
So
just
good.
seriously, and I think about so I met you in Austin when you were planning like Life AF, and I just remember you sitting there and you're like, it's like life is fuck.
Yes.
Like life is fucking hard, and there's all these different avenues and there's all these different things. And I was in awe of you because you had shared your story with all of us. And then you started talking about the process of rewriting your story. And that is a huge part of what you talk about and what you bring to people. And it's so powerful. So, can you talk a little bit about that? I know we kind of just did that,
Yeah.
but can we dive in a little more?
Yeah. It's interesting because I have a TED talk coming up and I was talking to the coach yesterday. And so when he heard rewriting your story, the way he took it was like, you can't go back and rewrite the past. And that's not what I mean at all. Like, we can't change what did happen. But when I say rewriting your story, I am talking about like, you're going to rewrite the next chapters because what happened to you doesn't have to define the rest of your life. You get to like pick up the pen now and go, okay, yes, like the affair happened, but that doesn't mean I have to become bitter and man hating and angry and single for the rest of my life and all of that. Like, I get to go, okay, new chapter, let's rip out the page, like the pages that I thought were going to happen, 10-year anniversary, we're going to celebrate life together, okay, those pages get ripped out. That like future that I created in my mind never happened anyway, but we build stuff in the future, so the new story is the new one I get to create and write. And we all do this. Like, we have ideas of what's going to happen, and I think part of the pain is that future gets pulled away or taken away. So even if it's a death of someone, like my mom right now is really sick and she was diagnosed with cancer. We thought she was going to die so many times the last 6 months. And so I went through the process of grieving. I went through anger or resentment. Like, why did this happen to her? Why is this happening now? I thought this would happen in 20 years when she's like 80, not when she's 60. And so now I have a new story I have to live with. Okay, what does it look like if she's not here? And while I don't like that idea, I have to face the realities this might happen. And so I had to start working through that in the moment. And so what it really looks like is going, what do I want? And that's a really hard question to answer. Right after my divorce, and I was talking with Jill Coleman. She and I did so many walks and talks, like so much just talk therapy to each other. But she just kept asking me, well, what do you want? And it was the hardest thing to answer. I'm like, I don't know. All I know is I didn't want this. But what that question starts to open doors of, okay, well, what do I want? Do I want to live this life? Maybe instead of the life that I thought I'd have with the white picket fence and dogs in a backyard, maybe I'm going to have a life of traveling. Because look, I was now single. I could do what I wanted. So I got to live out of a suitcase for 3 years. I couldn't do that as a married person. So I'm going, okay, what are new possibilities I never considered that could be awesome? I know friends who've gone through infertility and miscarriage. And so they had the idea they're going to have this family. And then it's like, okay, what does it look like if you don't have that? Maybe there's foster care, maybe there's adoption, maybe you and your partner just travel around because you thought it was going to be different and you get to create something new. It is probably not going to look like what you thought it was, but that doesn't mean it's worse and it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just going to be very different. And it actually gives you so many more options and choices. And in fact, I think what it really helps you do is like break down the constructs, the social constructs of like, go to school, get married, get a house, get a job. Like, now when one of those things is taken away, you're like, these constructs are bullshit. I can actually do whatever I want in my life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I love this because I think you're focusing a lot on the
like narratives we create in our head, right? For any
Mm-hmm.
situation, how we like do this future self, future relationship, whatever. And I also flashed on me though with how we can rewrite patterns. So,
Yeah.
for instance, in my life, I've always been with men who've cheated on me. And subconsciously, I've like been diving into this in therapy. Subconsciously, I don't like being cheated on, of course. Doesn't feel good. However, I really liked being the girl who always gets back up and always
Mm,
still loves other people like so intently, regardless of how hurt I've been. And again, like saying that out loud, it feels so gross that like subconsciously I was like thriving off of people being really terrible to me. And so, do you have any thoughts on that too? Of it's rewriting your story is also rewriting patterns that don't serve us.
yes. Oh, so good, so good. So when I was 15, I was pregnant as a teenager, and I ended up placing my daughter for adoption. And that's a whole other story. But I had this social worker, and she literally is probably the one I give the most credit to changing my life. And she was hard on me. One of the things at the time, 15, pregnant, I was blaming, angry, as a lot of teenagers are, angry at everyone, angry at my life, angry at my parents. And she really flipped it on me like, hey, you're choosing to be angry. And I'm like, no, I'm not. They're making me. And so it was about this choice. But what she also said to me was like, Danny, you've been programmed, and everyone has been programmed. But the good news is, if you can be programmed, you can reprogram. You can reprogram your thoughts. You can reprogram who you are. And so we honestly, probably 99% of our lives, we're running on a program. We're running on habits. We're running on past cycles. We don't even know, like what you just said. It's like it's coming to your awareness now. We don't even realize how many programs we're living out that we're not conscious of. Like, we get up, we roll out of bed, we brush our teeth, we have a pattern. We do this every day. We don't think to like get up and maybe, I don't know, walk naked outside, because that's not what we do. Like, we do a certain thing every day in a certain order, and we tend to not change that. So patterns, like relationship patterns, ways that we show up in the world, can definitely be changed. But the first thing is self-awareness. And it
Mm-hmm.
can be really tricky to see what those things are, because it takes not only looking at our past, but also takes really looking in the mirror and finding out, what are we getting out of this? Because like what you said, which is so profound, is that you're choosing this subconsciously because you get something out of it. You get to
Mm-hmm.
be the person who is never at fault, right?
Yeah.
You get to be the person who like gets to love again. So people look at you that way, like you're the hero, you're the savior. So we do always get something out of it, even if it looks bad on the outside. And so one of the exercises I've had people do is, when they're looking at patterns or looking at things that keep happening over and over, even if it's not a pattern, even if it's just like, okay, I lost my job and I'm angry about this, and nobody, like, I can't keep a job. Over and over, I'm always getting fired. My boss hates me. This person doesn't like me. This person at work. So, like, cool. That may be true. Maybe your boss did hate you and people were always throwing you under the bus. But what are you getting out of like losing your job all the time? Like, maybe you don't have to be responsible. Maybe you get away with not having to pay bills so other people can take care of you. And that may even go back to like childhood, and a lot of our stuff does. It goes back to how we related to our mom and dad, because those are the first people that we witnessed relationships around. And when I was kind of doing some counseling and coaching after my divorce, I was shocked to find, like, I thought I worked so hard to find somebody who was exactly opposite of my dad, and to realize, like, I married my father. And I was like, no, they're so different in all these ways. And yet they weren't. Like, the deep down ways, they were really the same. And so we tend to recreate the first relationships we've seen over and over and over, unless we really take a look at those and we try to do something vastly different. And it's hard, because it's like, you are right-handed and you're eating with your right hand all the time. If you start to try to do everything with your left, it's going to take some concentration and work and practice. So all of this stuff, when we're doing any kind of reprogramming or shifting, it is not easy and it's uncomfortable. And our minds and our bodies will automatically want to go to the old ways. So you have to just be consciously and hyper aware. And how you change things is through repetition. You look at any 3-year-old, They want to watch the same freaking movie over and over and over and over, or like the songs, the same songs. And you're just like, oh my God, can we stop with this fucking song? But that's how kids learn, and that's how we learn, and that's how things get imprinted. So like when I was saying about doing the affirmations while I was riding my bike, so many of those were also about the way I was thinking, because I was having this massive pity party. I was feeling really sorry for myself. I hated everybody, hated myself. So my affirmations were about walking, but they were also about personal stuff to me. Like they were about being beautiful. They were about having choices. They were about, being strong. So I wish I could probably find them. I think I have them somewhere, but they were affirmations to really reprogram my mind completely. And that I think was also the powerful piece behind me being able to get up and walk again. It wasn't just like physical, it was my whole being was different.
Mm. So much of this is speaking to me.
I love it. I love it. I could tell. I'm like, okay, let's talk more about your relationships. I love that stuff too, though, because relationships teach us so much about ourselves, who we attract in our lives, romantically and friends, the kind of friend, like I've always had really good friendships for the most part, but I did have a business partner and I think I probably talked to Josie about this, because whenever entrepreneurs come to me and they're like, hey, I want to get in business with my friend, or like, you guys doing a podcast together, I'm always like, it can be amazing, but it can also blow up in your face and you can also lose your friendship over it. And I had a business partner, she and I started the Sweaty Betties together, our brand. And there was a personal issue that came up and it split us. And I was devastated. That I would consider my first divorce. I was so heartbroken. I not only lost my business partner, but I lost my best friend. And I was torn up over it. And so I was angry for years. We actually just met in person a year and a half ago. It was like 7 years we hadn't talked to each other. And it was so funny that we could look back over time and just be like, oh my gosh, we were so angry. And like with the passage of that much time, it's like, what were we even talking about? But there were things that I had to learn, like who I showed up as a friend and as a business partner, that I take now into any partnership, like my partnership with Jill on the podcast. Anytime I do a partnership with anybody in business, now lines are very clear. Communication is very clear. There's way more honesty. There's way more expectation set. And I had to learn that from screwing it up with my first business partner. So if we can take the lessons out of every shitty relationship, then I think our next one could always be better. And like what you said earlier, Alexa, about being a failure, is we don't ever have to look at anything as a failure. It's just a lesson. Mm-hmm. It's a lesson for the next time. And the next time you get to try again and do it better.
Yeah. So spot on.
Mm-hmm. Seriously, it's so good. And I think about, so Lex and I, we have been together 3 times, like in person. But the way that we worked together to establish the boundaries that we had with like our business and like just how we work together, I feel like both of us like just meshed on that. So you talking about like having that clear communication is one of the biggest things that you can do, especially in a partnership.
Yeah. And like you have to be open to things changing. So Jill and I have the podcast together, and it was really interesting because when my mom went to the hospital, we were supposed to meet and record. And so she flew out to Vegas and we're in the hotel room, and I'm just sitting there like drained, and I hadn't hardly slept. I hadn't eaten. And she's like, we don't have to record if you don't want to. And I was like, oh, thank you. And just the relief, and also knowing, and we were getting so close to 1 million downloads, and this is back in October. And she goes, the downloads are going to come like as soon as we pick it back up. And so to have a partnership that's understanding and also being on the same page, she's like, you would do the same thing for me. And it was so true. And so to have a partnership where you establish what are your values. And so for us, it's like our relationship first, and then the podcast is second. And that's always been very clear for us. And if anything ever changed, if I'm like, hey, I need to do my business more, I can't do the podcast anymore, like we've both had that conversation. What does that look like? And I think it's so important to look at worst case scenarios with each other. What happens if I can't record? When you have a partnership, sometimes somebody's doing more work than the other person. Mm-hmm. And if there's resentment building, that needs to be brought up. And luckily for us, we're both the kind of people that are like, we want to do more than the other because we never want to be the one who's like,
Totally.
mooching. So, but there have been times where she's launching something and I'm like, hey, I'll do some solo episodes. And there's other times where I'm launching and she's like, I'll do some. And so we just pick up each other's slack. But that conversation had to happen so that neither one of us is going, oh, she's not pulling her weight. And, resentment starts to build. We interviewed this lady on our podcast named Renelle Nelson on Instagram. She's noir sex therapist, and she helps couples who like regain intimacy after infidelity. And she said that, and I think this goes for just every relationship. She said that the thing that can tear apart a relationship more than a third party is judgments, assumptions, and resentment. And she didn't say it in that order, but my boyfriend listened and he goes, oh, jar. I was like, jar? He goes, yeah, judgments, assumptions, resentment. And so we created a communication tool for the two of us where we say, and we used to do this on Sundays. Sometimes we don't do it as much. But we just say, hey, do you have anything in the jar? Like, is there anything like, so if like you getting sand in the jar, and it's like, if there's a little bit of sand, that's going to turn into something big, right? Like that little bit of sand in the jar, a little bit of resentment, a little bit of something turns into something big. So it's like, hey, do you have anything in the jar? Like you need to empty out. And there's times I could tell, like, we don't even wait till Sunday. I'm like, yo, what's in the jar right now? Like you're acting weird. Something's off. And, he'll spill it and go, okay, this is it. Like you said this, and it could have been an assumption. I'm like, no, that's not what I meant. But if it doesn't get brought up, that jar starts to fill up and fill up and fill up. And then soon enough, it's too late. So, and I think that can be something just to keep in mind for any relationship is like, there's something in the jar right now.
So spot on, because I feel like that's like a playful way of going about it. Also, like we've had people on the podcast, who help with communication and everything, but that to me is like a very just easy way to go about a possibly difficult conversation. So I love that.
Yeah.
We should use that. I think too, you describing you and Jill, I feel like that's so Josie and I. We like pride ourselves on like being two different women living two separate lives type of thing. And I mean, we got a baby mascot on the way. Like, of course, things are going to change. And I went through this like insane mental health healing time period in like this year. So yeah, it's just, I love that. What's in the jar?
Yeah, it's so good. And it is so easy and light because you can just kind of be like, hey, something's up. What is it? Like, you got something in the jar? It's like, well, okay, there's a little something in the jar. And it's easier to bring it up and talk about. So it's something that's definitely helped us. And I think that you need to have those tools, in your tool belt. That's one thing. Looking back at my marriage, there were some things that I thought we communicated, but small things like that, like maybe that were uncomfortable to talk about. You just go, I'm not going to bring that up because it's small. And that's the problem with the jar. It's sand. When it's sand, it is small, but that sand starts layering and soon you have this whole story built in your head about what's going on. And that story could have been squashed a long time ago. One thing I would recommend for everyone, if you guys haven't seen it too, is the Brene Brown special on Netflix. And she talks about, she does this thing where she says, the story I'm telling myself is, and like going back to what we were saying is like, we tell ourselves stories so much. Our whole lives are just, we're telling ourselves stories. And so she gives this example where she's swimming with her husband and I guess he doesn't hear her, but she's trying to call out to him. Anyway, she starts going like, oh, he thinks I'm fat. I don't look good in a bathing suit anymore. He doesn't want to be with me. So she's got this whole thing. And then they get to the end of the pool and she's like, honey, like I can't. And he just goes, I was trying not to drown out here. Like I didn't even hear you. And so it was just like this, oh my gosh, I feel so dumb. But how often do we do that? Like we just create a story. And so we started using that as well, kind of to tie in with the jar as, so what's in the jar? I'm like, okay, well, right now the story I'm telling myself is I asked you to take out the trash. You said you were going to do it before I got home. I left, I came back and it's still not done. So story I'm telling myself is you don't care, or you're just waiting for me to do it for you because you think if you leave it, I'll do it. And so then he's like, oh, this came up, or gives them a chance to like defend themselves, and usually the story is like, it was about me. And it's like, no, it wasn't about you. It's just about me having ADD. And I forgot, like, what the fuck?
Oh my gosh. I love that. So with this too, and just the rewriting your story, and like we're all so intricate and have so many layers. You said something about this on your Instagram, and we loved it. Like in a world where we want to feel seen, and this is like right up my alley. I love like feeling seen, heard, and loved. Right? Why do we also want to feel so hidden at times?
So good. I was on this is a really fascinating thing I heard the other day, and I never thought about it this way. I was on a 5-day challenge one of my friends did for fashion. And this is really interesting for women, and I literally never thought about it this way. And it isn't totally my answer, but this is something just for people to think about. So she was talking about fashion and why, like, we want to dress a way that we look powerful and we feel good and confident. Yet, as women, 100% of women that I know of, we could just put 99.99999, assuming there's like somebody who hasn't, has been called, catcalled, had something said about us. How many times have we heard of a woman getting raped and like, what was she wearing? So there's all these things about, it's really about protection. So if we're out there, if we're being seen, we're going to get criticized. Potentially, we're going to be catcalled by somebody. We're going to have somebody say something about our bodies. I mean, it doesn't, like, it's so funny. I've had where when I was in the fitness world, I dressed way more scantily online. Like I had bikini shots, and I get DMs of people saying like, I'm so hot, or making comments about my body. But there were times where I showed up to the gym wearing like the grubbiest sweats, hair crappy, and still had some motherfucker say something. So we have this innate part of us that wants to protect ourselves from predators and like creepy ass people saying stuff. So I think for one piece, there's some protection that we have built in, whether it just came from sometimes somebody said something and we're like, whoa, I was seen and I got to put myself back in a box. And I think that's a piece that's super subconscious that I never even considered. So I'm bringing it up now because I just like that just clicked for me recently. I was like, whoa, that's really interesting. I think the other piece is the fear of criticism and critique. My boyfriend, he's saying like he wants to be on YouTube and he wants to be out there. He goes, but I don't want the trolls. I'm like, dude, if you get on YouTube, no matter what you do, you're getting trolls. Like
Yeah,
that's where they
terrible there.
live, right?
Mhm.
They live on YouTube. I'm like, babe, you will get the trolls no matter what you do. I have a comment on there. Somebody wrote that my forehead was big enough for a drive-in movie. And I was like so devastated over it. I was like, geez, people are so mean. People saying I looked pregnant when I wasn't. I mean, they will say the meanest things. So why would you put yourself out there when somebody's going to say that stuff? Because we know, especially with the internet, that they're going to find like the part that you're most insecure about and they're going to call it out and say shit about it. So we want to be seen. We want to make a difference. And at the same time, we like want to do it quietly. We
Mhm.
don't want to get found out. And I think the other piece is that there's a part of us that believes if somebody knew the real us, if they knew all the real shit, like they knew our insecurities, they knew what we went through, they knew what's happened to us, that they're not going to like us or they're not going to think we're smart or know what we're talking about. And so there's this imposter syndrome of going, like for me, I was really afraid of people, I don't know, making up some stories about me, finding out my husband left. What are they going to think of me? They're going to think that I don't know what they're going to think, but I made up some stories of what they're going to think. So I think deep down, a lot of us feel like we're not good enough. And if people really knew the truth, if they really knew that, I didn't get a degree, if they really knew that I'm not that smart or didn't get good grades, if they really knew that my husband left me or I've been married 3 times, then they're not going to believe me, they're not going to trust me, or they're not going to like me. And so we want to be out there, but we don't want everybody to know everything. And
Yeah.
I think the anecdote to that is just owning it all. Just going, yeah, it's like the 8 Mile Eminem in that movie at the end, they're doing like a rap battle. And before the guy can call him out, he's like, yeah, I do live with my mom. Yeah, I don't have a job. Yeah, I don't like, he just calls
Yes.
out all this stuff. So he's like, you got nothing. You can't make fun of me. I made fun of myself.
Yeah.
So I think we are afraid of being found out. But the truth is, I think more people connect with you when they do know that
Mm,
you've got all that shit because they feel less alone. They're like, oh, me
yeah.
too. Like,
Mhm.
I'm embarrassed about that too. Holy crap. Like, now I feel seen. Like, if you're people who hear you feel seen because you're admitting it, suddenly you have a deep connection and you are really making a difference. But for some reason, we think we need to be like above, a step above, like we got our shit together. Ain't nobody got their shit together.
Nobody.
Nobody.
So, for one, I love that you brought up trolls, and I love that Jeff is like worried about them because
God. I'm like,
that's so
dude, come
funny.
on. I'm like, I guess I go, YouTube isn't for you then. If you're worried about trolls, you better just get off the internet.
Well, and I will never forget Jill. So Jill was my first business coach, and when she was like, "When you have trolls, you made it." We're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Okay." We're like, "Bring them on." No, but I think that a really great place to end with all of this would be talking about. Yeah, we put ourselves out there and we share the hard stuff as well as the good stuff. And bringing up the topic of celebrating ourselves and why it's so hard to
Mhm.
celebrate ourselves, but why it's so necessary. So, can you
Yeah.
dive into your realization that you've had on that?
Yeah. This is so funny. Like, I feel like I probably had this realization before, but then it was like smacked me in the face right before my 40th birthday. Um, it my birthday was coming up. 40 is a big one. I feel like we all have, I think, we all have our things that are, and I think birthdays are a big one for everybody. My 30th was a big one too, right? 35 was a big one. I don't know. I think every birthday from now on is going to be big. I'm like, ah. The irony is like, some people don't get birthdays. Like, we should be celebrating, but we have these ideas. And so Jill had asked me, she goes, well, what is it about your 40th? And I was like, I don't know. I guess I feel like I need to be at a certain place. Like, we have an idea of where I should be by now, what I should be doing. What does it look like? And then then it was also about people coming. My boyfriend was having a big party, and I was actually really anxious about that. I was anxious about people coming to celebrate me. And there was some part of me that just didn't feel deserving of that. I'm going, oh, like, I had people who flew in from another state who were paying money to stay in a hotel. And I'm going, I felt all this pressure going, oh my gosh, I have to make sure I hang out with them the whole time and make sure they're taken care of. And I was like, wait a second. Why can't I just enjoy that they're here for me? Like, I've flown out to see friends, go to their wedding, and I didn't even get to say hi to them. I was just there,
Mhm.
I was celebrating them. And I think that it's really interesting. And I think, again, this goes back to childhood stuff of, my mom was like, raised me to try to be perfectionist. It was like I was expected to get straight A's. If I didn't, I was in trouble. If I did, it was like, good, of course you did. You're supposed to do that. And so I had this mindset of like, everything is always supposed to be perfect. I'm always supposed to do the right thing. And so there's no reason to celebrate. Like, you got a degree, big deal. You're supposed to. Like, you graduated high school. I didn't go to my high school graduation because I'm like, everyone graduates high school. Like, you're supposed to. Why am I celebrating this dumb thing? Like, no. And so I never celebrated anything. I just felt like, go to the next thing, go to the next thing. What's next? Never taking the time to celebrate these little accomplishments along the way. And I think that's so detrimental because, honestly, if we don't celebrate the little things, when you hit the big things, you're not going to feel like celebrating those either because you always feel like there's something next. There's something bigger. Like, you're still not there yet. So I might hit my first, let's say, milestone, making six figures. It's like, oh, well, it's not seven figures yet. Then you hit seven and you're hanging out with people who are making eight figures and nine. You're like, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I made $1 million, but so and so is making 20 million. So it's not a big deal. And we just constantly are like beating ourselves up. And number one, it just doesn't help us get anywhere. And the second thing is like, this is your life.
Mhm.
Like, if you're just waiting for the next thing to celebrate, you're never going to get there. There's never going to be an end. And so we might as well just take it in and enjoy it, and at least give yourself a moment, at least give yourself a moment to just like take a deep breath and be like, wow, I did that. Like, I did something hard. It's not the biggest thing, graduated high school. Okay. A lot of people do it, but guess what? A lot of people don't. I turned 40. Oh my God, it's horrible. No, guess what? A lot of people don't get that. My friend Kelly didn't get that. She didn't even get it to 22. So I like had this moment of going, gosh, I'm scared of people celebrating me. And that came down to like deservingness and feeling good enough and feeling like I owed them something. And instead of sitting in and going, you know what? People like me. They love me enough to fly from another state to come celebrate my birthday. And I'm just going to sit in that and like receive it. And I think it comes back down to receiving as well. A lot of us, especially powerful women, have a hard time receiving. And so if there's anything I can leave you with is just like starting with compliments. When someone gives you a compliment, just say thank you, like receive the compliment. If someone wants to celebrate you, like celebrate, like let yourself have a little celebration of these milestones. And that's one thing Jill and I have really we've determined to do on the podcast, where we're like, we celebrated 100 episodes and then we celebrated 1 million downloads, because we have friends in this industry that are doing 2 million downloads a month, 5 million a month. It's like ridiculous. We feel like such a small fish in a big pond. But then there's people who are just starting theirs today who are maybe will never hit 1 million. So we're like, you know what? We need to make an effort to celebrate every little thing, because it's worth celebrating and it's worth acknowledging. And you're not going to get, I don't know, it's kind of like you can lose weight by hating your body, or you can lose weight by loving it. And you can have the same result, but which is going to feel better. So I think when it comes to celebrating, is like, if you want to get to the next level, you can do it by hating yourself there. But I think it's going to be a lot more enjoyable, and you'll enjoy the journey more if you can celebrate along the way.
Mic drop.
Boom.
Seriously.
So many snaps for that. Seriously, so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing everything. I feel like leaving people with so many just like thought-provoking things to do inside their own head to rewrite their story. Can you please share with everyone how they can find you and just be in your sphere?
Yes. So I think the best way is on Instagram. It's dannyj.com, and it spells like a boy, DANNY, and then the letter J, and then spelled .com, DOTCOM. And that I have a link in my bio there that goes to different kind of freebies, different things I'm doing, speaking events. I'm on Clubhouse, but I don't know how long that's going to last. So we'll see, but I do show up there. And yeah, so Instagram is probably the best way. It'll give you all the other ways to access me. My DMs are always open. And then the podcast, the Best Life podcast, is where we have a lot of these kind of conversations, talk a lot about relationships, even entrepreneurship, if you're into that. And just like things that most people don't want to talk about, we try to get in the nitty gritty. And then sometimes we just have ridiculous conversations. So you can go over there too.
So good.
Thank you so much, Danny. Like, seriously, you guys, Danny and Jill, they are two people that I just love and respect so much in this industry. And I'm so grateful that you were here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you both for having me on and allowing me to speak to your audience. And I wish you guys all the most success, and make sure y'all subscribe to their podcast if you're not.
Yeah. And subscribe to The Best Life too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do it both.
Yeah, there we go. Love you, ladies.
Love you.